I'm Joe. If you haven't been to the channel before, I talk about photography, video, audio, and other stuff. And today, I want to talk to you about my impressions of this 80-watt COB light from GVM. Okay, so real quick, I looked this up on B&H because I honestly don't even remember the model number of the light. It is the GVM P80s LED daylight balanced light. So first, let's talk about price. Right now, on B&H, it's listed at $119, making it what I believe is the cheapest COB LED light in this space. Now, there's a lot of connotations that come with that moniker, but I'll tell you, I've had it for 2 years. I used it during COVID when I had web calls to bounce light around the room and just kind of ambiently light me. I've used it in all kinds of YouTube stuff. I've used it in some product stuff. It's a super handy light. And honestly, at this price point, unless you are doing the most professional work, I think that this has a place in your video kit. And even for those of you who are seasoned pros that are going on set all the time, I still think this might have a place in your kit, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. First, I want to run over just kind of the basics of this light. Build quality is not amazing. As you probably heard when I lifted it up, that Bowens mount with the reflector on the front is awfully loose. Don't know that that's a massive issue unless you're going to be kicking and moving the light around. It's not going to wiggle on you. It's never released any modifier that I put on it. It's just loose. So if you're moving it around, you might hear a rattle, but again, it's rare on set when you would take your light and physically move it during a take. So I think that this is kind of a silly thing to get too upset about. There is a dial on the back of the light to dim it from 0 to 100%. There is no display or anything like that to show you where you are, but again, it's a $120 light. There is not what I would call a smooth dimming curve. I do think it has a little bit of a jump from 0 to 100, but again, it's a very cheap light. The construction is more or less all plastic. It outputs around 80 watts. I'm not a super techie reviewer on these kinds of things. I don't own a light meter, which I probably should, and that's a whole other video, but it puts out a pretty decent amount of light. Works really well as a key light, whether you put a softbox on the front of it or you blast it through diffusion. You could bounce it. You could use it directly, get some pretty hard light out of it, get some good cuts on your shadows. One of my favorite things about this light is probably one of the things that people might discount it for, and it is that plastic build quality, and I'll explain. The reason I love that about this GVM 80-watt light is because it makes it exceptionally lightweight. Why do I even care about that? Well, there's a couple reasons. I like that it's lightweight, one, because I don't have to have a monster stand to hold it up. Now, when you get a modifier on it, you might want something a little heavier, but still, no big deal. But perhaps more interesting and useful than that is to be able to use this thing in an overhead situation. And that's where I really have loved this thing. When I do stuff like this, I'll rig a super clamp to a 2x4 or just something overhead that will get it nice and secure. I recommend using a safety chain if you're doing something like this, just to make sure that nothing falls off while you're doing it and make sure you stay safe, or any talent you have on set stays safe. But once you have that rigged, you can put a spigot on the other end of your magic arm, lock this guy onto it, and it's not going anywhere. And it's so light that it doesn't take a super heavy magic arm or super clamp to hold it in place securely. I love that about this light. Another thing I love about this light is that low price point. And the reason is because it stresses me out a whole lot less than when I paid $1,000 for a light that I take out on set, or God forbid disappears. At least it was only 120 bucks. At that price point, you could afford to have a couple of these in your kit. So with all of that stuff said, who is this for? Who would I recommend this light to? Well, I guess that depends on what your lighting kit looks like. If you're literally out there looking for your first light for your kit, it's a super good purchase for that customer. I also think this is a good idea for you if you have a good lighting kit, but you're maybe looking for something that is a little bit more disposable or lightweight to put in some of those more precarious lighting situations or more restrictive mounting situations on set. Now, there's a couple downsides to this light, and if you watched any other videos about it on the internet, you probably already know about them. The biggest one probably is the fan noise. It is the loudest light that I have ever used. But as I've talked about before, I don't know that that's an absolute deal breaker. If you haven't seen it, or it's your first time on the channel, go and check out the video I did a while back on whether or not fan noise really matters on set. Now, some of you probably just jumped out of this video right now, and if that's the case, well, thanks to those of you who stuck around. In my opinion, unless you're using this as a key light extremely close to your subject and your mic is extremely close to the fan, you're not gonna notice it. It's not gonna be an issue. So for that, I say, go for it. Especially if you're in that first category where you don't already have a light. Now, a couple of the other caveats. That noisy, loose Bowens mount on the front. A lot of people don't like that. Then that's fine. If that's gonna bug you, you're not gonna like this light. Because it is. It's loose, it rattles when the reflector's on it. I just don't see that as that big of an issue. I get that it doesn't bode the greatest quality for the light, but I don't think anybody at GVM or anybody purchasing this would expect to have absolute machine precision for 120 bucks. The last thing about this light that drives me nuts is something that I've found in a lot more expensive lights too, and that's the power supply. This, like a lot of lights, has a power adapter style where there's a barrel connector that goes into the back of the light, and then it goes down to like a power pack that then goes to a D-shaped plug that you've seen on all kinds of electronic appliances, and then that goes to the wall. These kinds of power supplies drive me nuts because inevitably the barrel connector and the cable attached is not nearly long enough for you to fly the light up any level of height on a stand. So you end up with this power pack just dangling in the wind. It looks ridiculous. It's hard on the power connection on the light. It's just not a great experience to use. One last thing that I really don't love about this, but I've also found on a lot of other lights, including a lot of Godox's COB lights and some others, is the kind of weird ratcheting yoke tightening system that they have for tilting the light up and down when it's on a stand or on a spigot. I don't like it. It's kind of geared, so it has grooves. If a lot of you have used grip heads from like Matthews or Kupo or some of those, they don't have the grooves on them, so you can adjust in any linear increment. This one is kind of geared, so it kind of ratchets as you go through, so it locks into these various tilt angles. I really wish it was just like a washer system where it was just a smooth rotation and you could tighten it down. But there's a lot of lights that do this, and again, it's not a deal breaker. So at the end of the day, for me, this light is probably a buy for most of you if you need something with this brightness in this price range. I don't think you're gonna regret your purchase with this one. You just gotta understand where it excels and where it doesn't. And that's really most things in the equipment space. So that's it. My 2-year take on using the 80-watt light from GVM. I'm a big fan, especially if you don't have something like this already in your kit. Let me know what you think. Have you used this light before? Do you think any of these things would be a deal breaker for you in picking up a light? Do you think that I should go and finish my beer? Guys, you're awesome. Thank you so much if you've watched this far. If this brought you any value, please consider subscribing, and let's keep getting just a little bit better every time we press record.